Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to Juliette Blackwell, the New York Times best-selling author of Off the Wild Coast of Brittany and the Vineyards of Champagne. That makes me thirsty. In addition to writing the beloved Witchcraft Mystery series and the Haunted Home Renovation series, she also co-authored the Agatha Award-nominated Art Lovers Mystery series with her sister. Her latest novel, The Paris Showroom, is available for pre-order now and will be published on April 19th. Here to talk about that book and so much more is today's guest, Juliette Blackwell. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Juliette.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, I'm so pleased to have you. And I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody as we begin, which is, Juliette, where does your story begin?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's of course we could go on for hours about that. But my story as an author, I think, begins, as most authors do, with a love of reading. So, as kids, I think just the ability to read and to lose oneself in a story is such a magical place. And I, like so many people, sort of found refuge in a library at various points in my life. I actually did not consider actually writing. I mean, I wrote little kids' stories, but I didn't consider really writing until I was much, much older. Mm-hmm. And I did it almost as a lark. I had a whole business that I was doing, something completely different, an art business. And I just thought to myself, oh, it would be fun to write a story about this situation that I was in. And my sister, who's a professor of history, happened to be on sabbatical. So I sort of roped her in and we wound up writing a book together. And that was the very first book that I published.
So what year are we talking here?
That was, you know what? I should have figured that one out. I think it was 2006, maybe. Okay. So not that long ago. I mean, all right, for some of us.
So what was your life plan like before that point? It sounds like you're working in the art world, but what did you want to be when you grew up?
I'm not real good with plans. I'm more of a spontaneous gal. So I stayed in school for a very long time. I studied anthropology and was getting my PhD, which I never finished, but I was getting a PhD in anthropology, and was a waitress to pay the bills and that kind of thing. And then I went on from there I studied social work for a bit and was a social worker, a school social worker. And then I got into painting, especially, I've always painted. I love to paint, but I painted faux finishes and murals. And, a few years back, well, probably 15, 20 years back at this point, it was very big to paint everything to make it look like a Tuscan village. Mm-hmm. So I painted a lot of homes and made them look very Tuscan back in the day. And that's when I was working in the middle of the night, which I often did because we were always on remodeling schedules, and the painters are usually the last ones in. So I was working on a mansion in Pacific Heights about 2 a.m. with a friend of mine. And we were the only ones in the mansion, and it was a construction zone. And we kept hearing what sounded like someone walking overhead. And I thought, wow, this would be a great place for a murder. So that's why I wrote a murder mystery.
Now, was it somebody walking overhead? Was it an otherworldly thing walking overhead? What was it?
We never figured it out. We snuck around. It was most likely, a window that had been left open or something like that. But it's easy to let one's imagination run, especially at 2 a.m. when you're tired.
No, especially, right? So it's interesting. I've talked to 2 authors recently who told me about kind of otherworldly encounters. And one of them was living in a haunted house while she was writing her latest book. And another was about she was an author whose father would tell her what he called real ghost stories about kind of growing up in a log cabin during the Great Depression. And it was interesting to me in both of those situations how those experiences kind of were woven into their work. So but I think authors have, I think maybe we're just a little bit more open to the possibility of, you know,
Yeah.
ghosts being real, because our imagination, it's good for our imaginations, perhaps.
I think so. I think that any author, anyone who has those tendencies, filmmakers, anybody who's in the storytelling business, it's hard not to think about the possibilities, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really quite fun. And so I
So
did wind up writing one mystery series that was about haunted houses, renovating haunted houses.
yeah, the Haunted Home Renovation
Yeah,
series.
yeah, that was
So
fun.
yeah, when you started writing that book though with your sister, which was it sounds like the first book that you were writing,
Right.
what was that process like? You know, how did that idea come to you to write a book and rope your sister in, and what did you learn about yourself during that writing process?
You know, that was extraordinarily fun, I have to say. That was probably the most fun I've ever had with a book, because I had no sense that we would actually get published. So that wasn't the purpose of it. My sister lives in Virginia and I live in California. We're very, very close. So, you know, in the modern world, it's nice that we can be in touch through emails and telephone calls and that sort of thing. And so this was just, for years, we had passed books back and forth, like, you know, oh, you'll love this book, or try this series, or, you know, whatever, because we're both big readers. And this was a while ago. So it was when the cozy mysteries were first starting. I don't know if you know that term, or if your
Sure.
listeners do. But yeah, it's the kind of the funnier, soft mysteries. You know, I guess somebody gets killed, so it's not particularly
Right.
soft.
There's a body somewhere,
Right.
but you're not scared to death while you're reading it.
Right. It's not particularly gruesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like the Silence of the Lambs. It's more like the Silence of the Clams or something like that.
I like that. Very good.
Horrible joke.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. So as I said, since I was in this mansion and doing this faux finishing, and part of the faux finishing thing for me as a painter, I've never been formally trained in painting, but I did spend one summer in Florence kind of learning to grind my own paints and do that kind of thing. But I've always learned by imitating other painters. And when I was in Florence, there was a big kerfuffle at the time about a painting in the Uffizi that some people believed to be a fake and others did not. And so I got really fascinated by the whole idea of faking art and what it meant to create a fake masterpiece. And there are a lot of philosophical issues about it. If you appreciate it for what it is, for the beauty and everything else, does it really matter if it's a signed Rembrandt or not, and that kind of thing. Right. So as I was doing this faux finishing job, it occurred to me that it would be fun to have a character who had been kind of a natural forger, very, very good at art forgery as a youngster, but she got busted and she's now trying to go straight as a faux finisher. But of course she gets dragged back into the underworld of fakes and forgers. So yeah, so that's how the idea came about. And what happened was I actually just sat down and wrote a chapter. I had never done it before. I just thought, oh, that'd be fun. Let me see if I can do this. And I've read my whole life. So, you know, that whole thing of, oh, it couldn't be that hard. We could do better than that. And then it's, of course, much harder than one thinks. But anyway, I wrote a chapter and then I just emailed it to her and I said, this is really ridiculous, but I just wrote this chapter and wouldn't this be a fun story? And as I said, she's a professor. She's very good at ripping things apart. And she just, you know, said she used a track changes and changed everything and said, how about this? What about that? Blah, blah, blah. And we went from there. I would write like a first draft and then she would rewrite it. And when I say rewrite, I mean seriously rewrite. Yeah. Sometimes I would just be like, I have no idea how to get from point A to point B here. And she would fill in a scene or come up with something. And that's what we did. We just went back and forth. And it was so joyous because I was still working at my job and she was on sabbatical, but she was still doing her thing. And we didn't have, the idea of getting published. So it was just for the fun of it and really just creating that feel of, and that the creative feel of going back and forth and spurring each other on and giving each other ideas. And then we would also brainstorm a lot over the phone and that sort of thing. So it was just sheer, wouldn't this be fun? And it was. It was very
so
fun.
then walk me through like pitching that to, I mean, were you querying agents with that? I mean, when did you start to think that, hey, you know, maybe we should throw this out there and see if there's any commercial interest?
Yeah, you know, that's what was so funny for me. I mean, I really backed into this. We actually did start, I would say probably about 3/4 of the way through the book. I was like, you know what? I think this is an actual book. I think we should really finish this and see if we can sell it. But neither of us had any idea how to sell a book because we had both done writing, but it was academic writing, which is a very different ballgame. So I wound up going to, I did a little reading, and at the time, you still had agents listed in the big books. There was like Jeff Herman's Book of Agents or something. And I remember standing in Barnes and Noble and looking through this big thing. And how do you figure out an agent? You know, now everything's done by email. It's so much easier. But I didn't know what a query letter was. I had to learn about all of these things. I had no idea. So I actually wound up going to the Willamette Valley Writers Conference, I think it's called, which was in Portland or outside of Portland. And my aunt happened to live on the other side of the Columbia River. So I thought, oh, I'll go visit my aunt and go to this conference and see what I can learn. And I was definitely a sponge. You know, that was the conference I needed at the time. Yeah. It was very explicit. There were a lot of agents there, a lot of publishers and people talking about exactly what they were looking for in a package in terms of pitching. And then you had an opportunity to pitch to a certain number of agents one-on-one. And I got a few requests for manuscripts from that. Didn't sell it at the time, but at least I had my sea legs by then of what a query letter was and how to go about it.
Yeah, those conferences are so important, you know, versus kind of going in cold. You know, it shows the agents that, you know, you're committed if you're investing, you know, your money and your time and, you know, going to something like that. I've heard from other people the same thing, which is, you know, it shows that you're serious and it's a good way to make connections. But, you know, when you were saying, you know, right now everything's done over email, makes it easier to reach out to agents. It also makes it a lot easier for them to reject you.
That's true. It's very quick rejections. Yes.
It's if you want to be rejected fast, you know, send a query letter by email to an agent.
Very true. Very true.
You know, it's definitely a humbling experience, but
it's very humbling.
Let's talk about this the new book. So I know that it's a World War II story. Tell me more about the Paris Showroom and what you know, obviously you don't want to give too much away, but you know what the book's about and how the idea came to you.
Yeah, in fact, as I was mentioning to you, I have a little show and tell for those who are watching. It's the Paris Showroom. The boxes of the book just came, and so it's always exciting to open it up and see the artwork. The story is actually it's based on a story that I had never heard about World War II, and I'll back this up by saying I write a lot of books that are based in France, and of course, World War II is still very alive in France. Anyone who spends any time there, you know, the older generation is now dying off, but they remember it very well, and there are so many memorials and so many. It's just a very alive. To me, every time I'm there, I'm amazed at how alive World War II is. But I always thought, well, I'm not going to write a story about World War II in France because there are all these other things, and there are so many World War II stories, and what could I say that's new and all that sort of thing. And I was in Paris, and I read about this Leviton department store. It's a department store. It was a department store. And it was sort of a department store like IKEA is how it's been described, because it was very much for the working classes. It was not a fancy department store, but it was several stories high. And the Nazis kept prisoners there. It was a Nazi prison camp. And I was like, there was a Nazi prison camp in Paris? Because it's right downtown. It's in the 10th arrondissement. It's not, you know, out on the outskirts or anything like that. It's right there. And then there were two smaller camps as well, Bassano and Austerlitz. But in Leviton, they kept over 700 prisoners in the attic of this former department store that, of course, had been owned by a Jewish man who was forced to flee. So it was taken over by the Nazis, and they had their Operation Furniture, as they call it in English, to empty out Jewish businesses and homes of everything. I always thought they emptied the Jewish homes and businesses of valuable art and jewelry, which they did, but they took everything. They took saucepans, they took light fixtures, they just stripped everything. And then they would bring them to this department store, and all the prisoners were forced to clean and repair and sort and organize all of this loot. And then it was kind of packaged up and either sent back to Germany, like a lot of the basic stuff, the saucepans and things were sent to Germany for the ordinary citizens. But the best stuff, of course, was kept in Le Vuitton, and the prisoners were forced to set it out like as if they were in a department store. And the Nazi elite would come through with their wives and mistresses and pick what they wanted of, furs and clocks and antiques and just all sorts of things. Anyway, it just struck me as such an odd story. And I asked a lot of friends. My fiance is French, so I asked his friends and people who are Parisians who had never heard of this place. And so that also intrigued me. Like, how would you not know that this had happened within your own city? And actually, I have gone back to the building. I wasn't able to tour the building, but it's now an architectural firm. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they wouldn't let me in to tour it at the time. But it does now have a plaque on it that it held prisoners. But it's very understated. It's really not very much acknowledged. Yeah. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah, but it sounds like you found some real white space for kind of like a fresh World War II story. There's so much has been written about World War II.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and that's what I was looking for. I think that's why it was so intriguing to me. So in my story, it's a woman who is held prisoner. She's not Jewish. She was accused of being a communist. And she has an estranged adult daughter. Well, a daughter just turned 21, who's living with her paternal grandparents, who are very much cooperating with Nazis. So it's really the experience of the two of them, the mother being imprisoned and the daughter out on the streets, kind of, and they're both trying to get by. Yeah. Just like everybody. They're trying to survive and trying to figure it out. And I think it's all very bewildering. Whenever I write about any sort of wartime situation, I am reminded how bewildering it must have been for people. It's like now with Ukraine, right? It's like, what is going on? Right. It's not, now we look back with hindsight and we can see what was happening. But at the time, people are just being bombed or being arrested or whatever it is. And it's very bewildering to everyone, I think.
Yeah, fake news is not a new phenomenon. No. It's been used throughout the years to manipulate behavior. And again, we look back and we see things in black and white, winners, losers, good and bad. But for the people in the middle of it, when your country's occupied, yes, you're. I think all of us are about self-preservation to some extent, and the way we go about doing that is, can be different than the way our neighbors go about doing it.
Right. Yes.
So
exactly.
Some interesting moral dilemmas can come into play there.
Exactly. I think that's what I'm interested in with any sort of war story. I'm not particularly interested in military history. I'm very interested in how people get by. Like, how do they eat? Do they pay taxes? Like what's going on? Like the nitty gritty of every day. How do you get through the day when all of this is happening? And then what it means personally for people. And in my story, the main character, Capucine, who is the prisoner, she's got a number of very big regrets in her life, and she almost feels like it's divine retribution for her to be imprisoned. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that occurred as I was writing her, was that she was feeling it very personally, as if she didn't deserve better.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting.
You know what strikes me as I'm listening to you talk is, when you write, you can kind of observe. I mean, even though it's like a made up culture, right? But you can observe culture from kind of afar. You
Right.
can immerse yourself into another world and get lost into it, and you're creating it. But you were mentioning before how you were, studied anthropology. You were getting a PhD in it. There's a little bit of an anthropologist inside each writer, I think, isn't
I
there? In
think
terms
so.
of, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about that and what your fascination with anthropology was.
And it's funny you should say that. I have met so many anthropologists who are now authors. And I think you're right. I think there's something in some of us that make us very observant, very interested in observing how people interact, how they react. And it's not to say it's better or worse than anyone else, of course, but I think that you have to be extremely observant and intrigued by what you're seeing, right?
Yeah.
You have to be, what's going on and how's it going on, and all those little details. And I think like the sensory details of it and the everyday, the day-to-day stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a curiosity that comes with it too. So it's being observant, but also being curious enough to ask, what if?
Yes.
As an anthropologist, you can't really interject your own imagination into things, right? Because you shouldn't be projecting
Right.
anything that you're not observing, because it really is, anthropology is really about observational research. But
it is. Yes.
on the creative side, the what if, I think, are the two biggest words every author should kind of have in their tool belt, not to write on the page, but just to keep in their imagination. It's like, well, what if there was this department store and a story was kind of built around it?
Right.
It's a good 1-2 punch.
I agree with you. I think it's my fiance always makes fun of me when we travel in Europe, because not everywhere, but many places we go, I'll say, oh, look, that house is for sale. Oh, wouldn't it be fun to live here? And he used to take me sort of seriously, like, you want to live here? And I was like, no, but just imagine what it would be to live here. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. Like, what if you lived here? How would that work? Are you in a village or in a city? Or I'm very interested in that. And I'm also very interested, and this I think comes from anthropology as well. I'm interested in the outsider view of things, feeling a bit of a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
This book actually is about two French women who are French, who've been there, born and raised. But all my other books have been about Americans in France,
mm-hmm.
Because that's very much my experience. But I do enjoy that sort of being the fish out of water, and how does that work, and how do people respond to you, and how do you respond to them? But in some ways, the Paris Showroom, Capucine, because she's not Jewish, she's most of the prisoners are Jewish. So she does feel like a bit of an outsider there as well.
Yeah. So the book's on sale April 19th. Assume it's available wherever people can buy books.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Very cool.
Yes. Very much.
Very cool. Well, Juliet, I've got some questions for you that I ask most of my guests here. These are my hot seat questions, and they're meant to be fun. So no need to stress over them. First one is taking a trip back in time to when you were a child. What were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
Oh boy, when I was a kid, well, this will, yeah, Bewitched.
Okay. So first question: new Darren or old Darren?
I'd say old Darren.
Got to go with old Darren.
Yeah,
There's only one answer to that
definitely.
Old Darren. Darren, I believe, was an advertising man, if I'm not.
He
not
was.
Mistaken. Yes,
he was indeed.
Yeah, that was a great show.
That was a fun show for sure.
Did you ever see the motion picture Bewitched with Will Ferrell and Nicole Kidman?
I never did. Did you?
Yeah, I did. There were some funny parts.
Yeah.
But much like the Chips movie that came out a few years ago,
Okay.
lost a little bit of the original kind of, I don't know,
interesting.
campiness of it. So
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. My
and
dad loved Chips. I remember he loved that show.
Their
Yeah.
dad loved Chips. I love Chips. My brother and I, if we were good in church, my mother used to say, "You guys can watch Chips tonight."
Oh, wow.
And
Nice.
we thought we were Ponch and John, riding our little bicycles, up and down, Plantation, Florida.
I'll bet. That sounds very cute.
All right, Bewitched.
Yeah.
Anything else come to mind in addition to Bewitched?
The other one that somebody reminded me of recently was Dark Shadows.
Oh my gosh, yeah, with the vampire guy.
Yeah, the original. Yeah.
Dark Shadows. It was like a almost like a soap opera, but with a vampire.
It was a soap opera. It was every day for like half an hour or something.
Yeah.
And I wasn't supposed to watch it. My mother said I was too young and it would scare me. But I had two older sisters, and so they got to watch it. So I would have to sneak in, and it did scare me, but I was fascinated and scared at the same time.
That's another one they made into a movie with Johnny Depp. I never saw that, but
and they've redone it as well. They did a reboot of the soap opera, like in the, I don't know when, 80s or something, but I haven't seen it. Yeah, this was the original. Yeah,
the original.
Mm-hmm.
All right, how about this? So let's turn from TV to music. So if we were following you around as a teenager, what would we find you listening to in terms of albums, cassettes, CDs, depending on how you were getting your music?
As a teenager, well, it was definitely cassettes then. And it was, if you were lucky, you got a mixtape from your friends. I was part of the mixtape generation.
Of course.
I'll say. What were we listening to? I mean, it was Eagles, Journey. My sister used to love ABBA. She had ABBA going constantly. In fact, my father's living with me now. So he has recently discovered ABBA, which is really interesting. So I'm sort of thrust back into my middle school days every time I hear it. They had
an album come out last year. A new one, right? An album of new ABBA music, and it sounds good. My daughter is a big ABBA fan. When my kids were younger, we wouldn't listen to Raffi and all the stuff that kids listen to. My wife and I were like, okay, they're listening to the Beatles. We're gonna put on ABBA was a big one in rotation, and they used to love Dancing Queen, Fernando.
Oh yeah.
They used to argue over what song we'd play next.
That's great.
But it always stuck with them. They loved the Mamma Mia movies, and
yes.
But yeah, so my daughter told me she was home from college. She's like, there's a new ABBA album out. I'm like, what? At least one of them I thought was dead, but apparently they were all still around.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The other one I listened to a lot was when I was a little bit younger, not full teenager, was the Monkees.
Oh, sure.
My sisters were older and they introduced me. They had all the albums. And we had a very old record player, but that it was the little portable record players. And I would just listen to those albums over and over. Yeah.
But they were great. I had a roommate in college who had a copy. I guess the Monkees in their later years, they tried to do what the Beatles did, and they tried to get a little psychedelic. And they created this really weird album.
Oh, really?
and my roommate, who was really into like alternative music, played it for me. I'm like, this is not I'm a Believer. This was something that was like way different. But yeah, there is a black market Monkees, bootleg album out there somewhere.
I don't think I've heard that one.
Yes, no, it's not. It's definitely not what you think. Okay, number 3. So, you mentioned kind of being an anthropologist. You also mentioned working as a waitress. What did you learn about people while working as a waitress?
Oh, I think any restaurant staff would tell you. You learn a lot about people. You learn to kind of judge people quickly, which can be, which isn't always a good thing, but I think being able to sort of assess a table and the interactions between people and that sort of thing is good. I learned a lot of patience. I learned to use humor to diffuse situations often. The restaurants can be high stress, but they're also generally a place that people go to have fun and relax. So if you can kind of help people segue into the relaxation situation is usually a much better, because they come in sometimes stressed, I found.
Sure.
After
No,
work. Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. How about this one? This one's
Also,
more about,
sorry, one more thing. You
Yeah,
learn to apologize for the kitchen. there's a lot of taking heat for the kitchen.
I'm sure. And it was interesting. I was down in Florida last week with my parents, and we went out my parents are 88, 89. There's always a story that happens whenever we go out, but we went to a restaurant for dinner. We met 3 other couples. So it was everyone's couples and I'm there single. But the food was coming. It wasn't coming out fast enough for everybody. Now these are people in their late 80s. So they get hungry and they get cranky. And it's like I did not envy our server, because like every 5 minutes somebody was bothering her about when the food's coming. And I could see where the job requires a tremendous amount of patience.
Yes, I think so. I think it does.
How about this? How do you feel when you're looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write? So your goal is to write something, or to start writing something, nothing in front of you. How do you feel?
I love it, actually. I love the blank slate. I like the blank slate a lot. I have one of my best writing friends, Rachel Heron, who's a great writer. She loves revising. She hates the first draft and loves revising, and I love the first draft and I hate revising. So we always lean on each other during our harder moments. But yeah, I find it very exciting because everything's possible. It's before I've written it, it's still the best book I will ever write. And while I'm writing it, at the end of my first draft, I'm like, ugh, this isn't what I wanted. I don't think this is what I wanted. And I'm too close to it then. It's really hard to see it for me once it's there, because I've been working with it so long. But at the beginning, it's like a little baby.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And then you send it to an editor, and then they tell you about your baby.
Yes. Exactly.
And then you see how cute or uncute your baby might be.
Yes.
Yes. What lessons about writing do you feel like you had to learn the hard way?
To keep a series Bible. That's a big one. I have a couple of ongoing series, and one, I think I have 11 books in it, and it has a lot of devoted fans, and they read that series sometimes, over and over and over. And if I make a mistake, like forget something from the first book, which I wrote 15 years ago, they will remember and remind me. And that's a little brutal.
Right.
So yeah, I would just keep a good ongoing series Bible, especially for a series.
Your fans will keep you honest.
Yes,
it will keep you honest. And then if you could write a letter to your younger self and mail it, so that you can give your younger self some advice, kind of with everything you've learned along the way in your career, what are some of the things you would tell your younger self? How would you kind of address your younger self?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm glad you told me not to stress over it, because this is the sort of thing I would stress over.
No stress, no wrong answer. No wrong answer.
No, I think the biggest thing for me would be to not worry so much about everything. I've spent, like a lot of people, I guess, I have spent a lot of my life worrying. And it's almost always not the thing I should have been worrying about anyway. It's like the wrong thing if you're going to worry. So, to be able to be in the moment more and just enjoy what you have, or if it's a hard thing, also be in the moment, but not spend a lot of time and energy worrying about things. That would be my biggest
not an uncommon answer. Trying to reassure yourself that things are going to work out okay.
There you
go. I've got a bonus question, because I'm looking in the background and I see a bottle of Maker's Mark, and I see a bottle of Frangelico.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know if you think that Frangelico looks like a bottle of Mrs. Buttersworth.
It's so funny you should say that. It does. It totally does.
Because I've been staring at it for a half hour now, and I'm thinking to myself, why did she have
Did you have maple syrup?
maple syrup or fake maple syrup on her counter? And I'm realizing, oh no, that's what Italian people put in their coffee.
That's so funny.
At least that's what my Italian grandmother put in her coffee.
Oh, okay. There you go. There you go.
So
Well, I've noticed your corks in your background.
Yes,
and,
many a cork back there.
Uncorking a mystery. And my fiance is actually a wine importer. So,
oh, all right.
So I should have a whole bunch of wine behind me. That would make more sense. Probably.
There you go. Yeah, no, these are all the stories I've uncorked. And
yeah, I love it. I
wish I could say that I drank all of those, but I did not. It's really just a picture I bought from from a stock photography site.
I like it though. It's good. It's very good.
So my liver thanks me for not drinking all those bottles of wine.
Well, that's probably true. Yes.
So that's that. Well, Juliet, this has been a fun conversation.
Yeah.
I imagine some of my listeners might want to look up some more information on you. So do you have social media handles or a website that you want to throw out there for them to?
Yeah, the website is julietteblackwell.net or .com. We'll get you there. And I am on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And I think it's either Juliette Blackwell or Juliette Blackwell author at all of those. So
all right. Yeah. I'm sure they will find you. And as a reminder, the Paris Showroom will be available April 19th, and it is available for pre-order now. So mark your dates, though. Buy the book. It's going to be a good read.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate this. Thank you for doing this for readers and for authors.
All right. Thank you.
Nice thing.